Her husband betrayed her. Everyone thought she was weak, until her daughter did the unthinkable. A hidden video, a shocking secret. One child's courage could destroy everything her enemies built. Lies, deceit, and betrayal will be exposed, and no one, absolutely no one, is safe. Watch till the very end, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. How would you rate my stories so far out of 10? And tell me, what kind of stories do you want to see next? Romance, drama, suspense, or something completely unexpected? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that will touch your heart. Now let's dive right into today's story. Isla had always believed that love would be enough to bind a marriage, that devotion and care could bridge even the widest chasms between hearts. But as she moved through the grand halls of the mansion, a cold shiver traced her spine, and she realized with a sinking clarity that love had long ago abandoned her. Each room she entered whispered echoes of her loneliness, gilded walls reflecting her isolation more sharply than any mirror could. Even the crystal chandeliers, which cast a delicate glow across the polished floors, seemed to mock her, sparkling in indifferent brilliance, as if highlighting how invisible she had become. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the absence of warmth, a weight pressing down on her chest with every breath she took. Her husband, Darien, existed in the same house but in a different realm altogether. A world of calculated movements and silent judgment, where his eyes met hers only to assess and critique. Isla had long since stopped expecting tenderness or recognition from him. Even the simplest gesture, a gentle smile, a word of encouragement, was met with a blank stare or a faint curl of disdain, subtle enough to wound yet impossible to confront. She had perfected the art of moving unseen, slipping past him like a ghost, hoping to leave no disturbance in his carefully ordered life. Each day, she recited the rituals of survival, the cleaning, the cooking, the quiet tending to her daughter's needs, all performed with meticulous precision, as if by following the motions she might somehow stitch the fraying threads of her family together. Yet inside, a storm raged. Isla's heart clenched with a blend of fear, exhaustion, and an unspoken anger that she dared not voice. There were nights when she would lie awake in the dark, the distant hum of the city leaking through heavy drapes, wondering if she had been wrong to trust in promises unspoken, to surrender herself so completely to a man who had never truly loved her. She would trace Leora's small, delicate hands in the moonlight and feel a pang of guilt for the life she could not shield her daughter from. Leora, with her bright, searching eyes and tender smiles, was Isla's anchor, the one light in a life otherwise shaded in grey. And yet, even as she watched her child sleep, Isla's heart quivered at the thought that Darien might take that too, the only thing she truly cherished, if the currents of his cruelty ever rose high enough. The mansion itself was a reflection of Darien's personality, cold, imposing, flawless, and suffocating. Walls adorned with expensive artwork felt like silent sentinels, and the polished marble floors echoed every footstep, amplifying the sense of exposure. Isla moved carefully, conscious of every creak of the stairs, every whisper of her skirts against the floor, as if noise itself were a crime. The servants, few and distant, had learned to keep their heads down, their whispers swallowed by fear or indifference. And yet, the silence of the mansion, while ostensibly calm, carried the undertone of impending chaos, a tension that Isla could sense even when the house was empty. It was as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for a moment when something, anything, would break the delicate balance of control. Darien's presence was felt more than seen. Even when he was in another room, Isla could sense his gaze, sharp and measuring, cutting through the air like a blade. His footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, carried authority, announcing his movements without the need for words. When he spoke, his voice was measured, rarely raising an emotion, yet capable of slicing through her with cold efficiency. Isla had learned to read the pauses between his words, the subtle shifts in tone that signaled disapproval or silent judgment. She lived in constant awareness of his attention, always careful to maintain composure, never giving him reason to scorn or question her. Yet, with every day that passed, the strain grew heavier, a weight pressing against her chest so relentlessly that she feared her heart might crack beneath it. One evening, as Isla tucked Leora into her bed, smoothing the soft curls that framed her daughter's innocent face, she felt Darian's presence more acutely than ever. He lingered at the doorway, his expression unreadable, a mixture of contemplation and quiet tension that made her pulse accelerate. The shadows cast by the soft bedside lamp seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if bending toward the unfolding drama, whispering that this moment, so ordinary on the surface, carried the potential for sudden upheaval. Isla's hand paused mid-air, fingers frozen above Leora's blanket as a chill traced her spine. There was something in the rigid set of Darian's shoulders, the stillness in his stance, that warned of imminent confrontation, though no words had been spoken. The ticking clock sounded unusually loud, each second hammering against Isla's temples, a cruel metronome counting down to an unknown event. She tried to convince herself that this was imagination, a trick of the mind fueled by years of suppressed fear. Yet instinct screamed otherwise. The air seemed to thicken, and even Leora's soft breathing was a fragile rhythm that felt fragile, precious, and alarmingly vulnerable. Isla's heart thudded so loudly she feared it might betray her to the one man whose attention she dreaded most. And in that suspended moment, she realized with sudden clarity that nothing in her world was stable, that the life she had meticulously maintained teetered on a precipice, unseen but perilously close. Darian finally moved, stepping silently into the room, the click of his polished shoes against the hardwood floor a whisper of authority. Isla froze, aware that her own body had become a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Leora stirred but did not wake, sensing the tension like a sixth sense, her small hand curling around the blanket as if seeking protection from the invisible storm. Darian's eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked toward Isla briefly, then back to the child, and for a heartbeat the air seemed to condense into suffocating pressure. Isla swallowed hard, realizing that this ordinary evening was anything but ordinary. Something had shifted, a subtle but undeniable change in the atmosphere that spoke of secrets waiting to be unveiled. She tried to steady her breathing, to summon the calm composure that had become her armor, but the sense of foreboding gnawed at her. There was an envelope on the side table that she had not noticed before, a thin sliver of white that seemed to pulse with silent menace. Isla's eyes widened as she realized that something unseen and deliberate had already entered her life, an agent of chaos disguised in mundane paper and ink. Her fingers itched to reach for it, to know what awaited inside, yet she hesitated, acutely aware that crossing this threshold could change everything. The lamp flickered, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but enough to make Isla jump, heart hammering. For a brief moment, the mansion felt alive, its walls shifting with expectation, as if anticipating the unraveling of long-held secrets. She sensed that she stood at the edge of something monumental, a precipice between the familiar cage of her existence and the unknown, terrifying expanse beyond. And in that instant, Isla understood a truth that chilled her more than any cold stone or polished floor could. Her life, painstakingly constructed around the illusion of stability, was about to be shattered, and there would be no turning back. Her gaze flicked to Leora once more, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the approaching storm, and Isla's chest tightened with protective fear. The thought of losing this light, this small beacon of hope and innocence, sharpened the edges of her anxiety into a knife of dread. Every instinct screamed that danger was imminent, that her carefully maintained equilibrium had been breached. And as Darian's presence lingered in the doorway, silent and unreadable, Isla felt a shiver of premonition, an invisible warning that the chains she had lived under were about to snap, but not in the way she expected. The envelope remained on the table, unassuming yet brimming with peril, a quiet herald of upheaval. Isla's hand twitched involuntarily, drawn toward it, yet recoiling from the unknown horrors it might contain. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Accusations, betrayals, the loss of her daughter, a life dismantled piece by piece. She understood, with a clarity sharpened by years of subservience, that whatever lay within that paper would set into motion forces she had no control over. And for the first time in years, Isla felt the icy grip of fear tighten around her heart, unrelenting and merciless. Darian's gaze held hers, inscrutable, almost testing her, and Isla's pulse quickened. Was he aware of the storm that had already begun to stir, or was he its architect? The question burned in her mind, unanswered, as if the mansion itself held its breath in anticipation. A single misstep, a word spoken too soon, a gesture misread. Any of these could tip the delicate balance into disaster. Isla's eyes flicked to the shadows dancing on the walls, and in their shifting forms she glimpsed the echo of secrets yet to be revealed, each one a dagger poised to pierce her carefully constructed world. The night stretched, heavy and oppressive, every tick of the clock amplifying the dread coiling in her chest. Isla remained by Leora's bedside long after sleep claimed her daughter, fingers brushing a stray curl from the child's forehead, a silent vow forming in her heart to protect her at all costs. Yet the sense of vulnerability gnawed relentlessly, a reminder that she had been alone in this war for far too long. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the mansion's walls felt like a message from fate itself, a harbinger that the cage she had lived in for years was about to crack, and the consequences would be far-reaching. And then, as the clock chimed midnight, a subtle shift rippled through the room. Isla's eyes darted to the envelope once more, her chest tightening as if sensing the weight of unseen hands pressing down on her. The mansion, vast and ornate, felt suddenly smaller, suffocating, every shadow a potential threat, every reflection a silent observer. Isla realized with a chilling certainty that her life, the life she had clung to, the life she had believed was safe, was no longer her own. Something had been set into motion, a force she could neither see nor control, yet one that would change everything she knew. Her hand hovered over the envelope, trembling, indecision, battling fear. And in that suspended moment, Isla understood the inescapable truth. The storm had arrived quietly, stealthily, yet its power was undeniable, and there would be no turning back once she dared to face it. The doorbell rang, but it did not sound ordinary. In Isla's ears, it was a thunderclap in the stillness of the mansion, sharp and intrusive, cutting through the fragile calm she had tried to cling to after the evening's tension. Her heart leapt violently against her ribs, as though anticipating the arrival of some irreparable disaster. The sound echoed down the polished marble halls, bouncing back at her in ominous reverberations that seemed to mock her fear. For a brief, frozen moment she hesitated, hand on the door handle, unwilling to move but unable to ignore it. The mansion felt heavier now, the shadows stretching longer, almost leaning toward her, a silent audience to the disaster she sensed had arrived. Before she even glimpsed the messenger outside, a thick envelope was thrust into her hands, its weight unnatural, as though it carried not just paper, but the suffocating gravity of her world tilting. The law firm's emblem was stamped in cold black ink, sharp and formal, each line a silent accusation. Isla's fingers trembled as they traced the edges, and a creeping sensation of doom coiled in her stomach. Her pulse raced, a rapid drumbeat that seemed to clash violently with the delicate ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She wanted to set the envelope down, to step away, but something in her chest, a mixture of dread and duty, forced her to break the seal. The papers inside were precise, merciless, surgical in their cruelty. Isla read the words in disbelief, each one a dagger aimed directly at her sense of self. Darian had not only abandoned her emotionally, he had orchestrated a complete dismantling of her life. The document labeled her a failed wife and unfit mother, accusations crafted with venomous intent, their language both cold and cutting. Isla's eyes blurred with tears, though she pressed them back, unwilling to surrender to the storm inside. Each line of the document clawed at her pride, stripping away the illusion of safety she had desperately maintained in the mansion's quiet halls. Darian's claims were comprehensive, calculated to destroy her from every angle. Full custody of Leora, all marital assets, and even control over the mansion itself. Everything she had once considered hers, everything she had poured herself into, was now being stripped from her with clinical precision. Isla's vision swam as the weight of reality descended upon her, a physical pressure that made her knees threaten to buckle. She stumbled to the nearest chair, clutching the envelope as though it were both a lifeline and a tormentor, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. The words seemed to echo, repeating themselves in her mind, a relentless drumbeat of humiliation and fear. She tried to focus, to rationalize, but the numbers and claims on the paper were staggering. Darian had drained their accounts methodically, leaving Isla isolated and defenseless, her financial independence annihilated in one sweeping act. Her mind raced through scenarios, each darker than the last, as the implications sank in. If she could not defend herself, what would happen to Leora? What future awaited them in a world where Darian's cruelty could extend beyond words into legal dominance? Isla felt the room tilt, the polished floor beneath her swaying as if the mansion itself were complicit in this betrayal. Anger and fear wrestled violently in her chest, each one amplifying the other. The thought that Darian could meticulously orchestrate such devastation shook her to the core. She had always believed she understood him, had believed that she could reason with him, that her devotion might rekindle some fragment of the man she had once loved. But now, staring at the evidence of his calculated malice, Isla realized that she had been naive. This was not mere neglect or emotional distance. This was personal, deliberate and precise, a strategic attack aimed at annihilating everything she held dear. The envelope slipped from her trembling hands onto the floor with a hollow thud, and for a brief second, the mansion was deathly silent, except for her ragged breathing. She sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, the cold marble pressing into her skin as a cruel reminder of the emotional frost Darian had brought into her life. She felt cornered, a prey animal trapped by an unseen predator who had manipulated every move of the game with meticulous skill. The image of Leora, innocent and bright-eyed, flashed in her mind, and panic surged anew. She could not, would not, allow her daughter to be dragged into this abyss. Her thoughts fractured, leaping from one fear to another. Would Darian hire someone to monitor her? Was there more manipulation waiting beyond the paper, ready to strike when she least expected it? The house, which had always seemed imposing, now felt claustrophobic, walls pressing in, ceilings lower, shadows deeper. Every reflection in the mirrors lining the hallway seemed to flicker with hidden meaning, as if mocking her uncertainty, as if warning her that nothing in this life was as it seemed. Sleep that night became a stranger. Isla lay awake, tossing in the vast, cold bedroom she had once shared in comfort. The moonlight poured through the curtains, highlighting the ornate furnishings, the expensive fabrics, the very trappings that now felt like gilded chains. Each creak of the old floorboards in the quiet house sent her heart racing, each whisper of wind against the window pane a portent of the chaos that had entered her life. She imagined Darian moving through the halls, calculating, watching, waiting for her next move. Every sound amplified her fear. Every shadow became a potential threat. Isla's mind returned obsessively to the envelope, to the words she had read, to the methodical cruelty etched into each line. The thought of being deemed unfit as a mother, of losing Leora, ignited a fire within her that mingled with fear, creating a volatile mix of adrenaline and despair. She visualized the courtroom, the cold judge, the smug expression of Darian as he laid claim to what was hers. And yet, beneath the terror, a tiny ember of resolve flickered. If he thought she would crumble completely, he had underestimated the very force he had sought to suppress. Even as Isla wrestled with panic, her thoughts circled to possibilities. Could she fight back? Was there a way to expose the truth, to turn the tide against such calculated malice? She did not yet have the answers, but the thought of inaction was unbearable. Her daughter's future, their life together, hung precariously in the balance, and Isla understood that the moment for passive endurance had passed. The war had begun. Then, a subtle noise in the hallway froze her in place, a soft tap, a careful, measured sound that was almost swallowed by the mansion's silence. Her pulse quickened as she realized she was not alone, even in the stillness of the night. Was it Darian, returning to ensure his plans unfolded exactly as he had written? Or was it another presence, a messenger of some yet unknown twist? Isla's breath caught, her chest tight with anticipation and dread, every instinct screaming that the fragile order of her life had shattered. Her eyes darted to Leora's empty bedroom across the hall, imagining her daughter asleep, vulnerable, unaware of the storm that had already crossed the threshold. Isla's maternal instinct surged, a tidal wave of protective energy that eclipsed her fear for a moment. She would fight. Whatever it took, she would fight to preserve the small fragment of love and normalcy that remained. And as the moonlight flickered across the envelope on the floor, Isla understood with bone-deep certainty that the crushing blow had already landed, that Darian's cruelty was calculated, relentless, and far from over. This was no ordinary separation. This was a prelude to a war, one that would test her limits, challenge her courage, and force her to confront the darkness lurking within the man she had once trusted with her heart. The storm was here, and its first strike had left her world reeling. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every shadow a threat, every sound a potential warning. Isla's mind raced, weaving through the nightmare unfolding around her, aware that the night was far from over, aware that the envelope was only the beginning, a catalyst for a battle she could not yet see in full. And in that suffocating stillness, she realized the truth. Her life, the life she had meticulously maintained under the watchful eyes of Darian, had already been claimed by chaos. A cold sweat prickled at her hairline, and Isla felt a premonition, chilling in its certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Whatever plans Darian had laid, whatever manipulations he had orchestrated, she would face them. But first, she would have to survive the night, survive the first wave of this merciless onslaught, and somehow find a way to protect the only light she had left, Leora. The envelope, the doorbell, the shadows in the hall. They were not mere accidents. They were heralds of a meticulously designed assault, and Isla understood that she stood at the threshold of a battle she could not avoid. The crushing blow had landed, the game had begun, and she would have to rise or be destroyed. Isla barely slept that night, her mind clawing at the edges of reality as the divorce papers lay on her desk like a venomous creature waiting to strike again, the ink on them still sharp enough to cut through whatever fragile hope she carried. And when dawn finally bled into the sky with a muted, indifferent light, she rose from her bed with the heavy stiffness of someone who had aged years overnight, her body trembling with the weight of betrayal she still couldn't fully grasp. Every step toward the kitchen feeling like she was walking deeper into Darian's trap rather than away from it. And as she prepared Leora's breakfast mechanically, her mind replayed the cruel accusations written so confidently in that envelope, the labels unfit mother and unstable wife echoing in her skull like a verdict from a judge who hadn't even looked at her. And the air in the mansion felt thick, sour, tainted by the knowledge that her husband, her partner, her family had orchestrated something so monstrous behind her back, and that knowledge dug into her ribs until she could barely breathe, especially when she glanced toward the doorway where Darian had stood the night before, his face unreadable, his silence louder than violence, and she wondered for the 1,000th time how long he had been planning this. How long he had looked at her with eyes that already saw her as the enemy, and the thought made her grip the counter just to stay upright as Leora asked in her small, bright voice why Mommy looked sad again, forcing Isla to swallow the storm in her throat and pretend, even though she was breaking apart so violently inside that she feared she would shatter if someone touched her too gently. Later that morning, Isla sat in Adrian Locke's modest, warmly lit office, a space so drastically different from the cold, polished halls of Darian's world that it almost disarmed her, and Adrian's calm presence, his steady gaze behind rectangular glasses, offered her the first fragile thread of safety she'd felt in days, though that safety faltered the moment he slid a folder across the desk toward her, a folder thick with evidence that did not belong to reality, but to a twisted, fabricated version of her life, a version that Darian had crafted with meticulous cruelty, and as she opened it, her stomach dropped into a void deeper than fear, because there, staring at her, were photographs of her home looking like a battlefield of neglect, dishes piled to the ceiling, toys drowning the floor, stains and dust that had never existed in her world, and Isla felt her lips part in shock as Adrian gently explained that the timestamps had been altered, the angles manipulated, the scenes staged to portray her as careless, overwhelmed, incapable of providing a stable space for her daughter. And if that wasn't enough, Adrian then revealed receipts, falsified receipts showing expensive shoes, bags, jewelry she had never seen, purchases supposedly made with Darian's card under her authorization, and Isla felt a choked sound rise in her throat, a sound that wasn't quite a sob and not quite anger, but something cracked and raw in between, something that tasted like helplessness and betrayal, burning on her tongue. As she turned each page, her fingers trembling harder with every fabricated detail, Adrian's voice softened even further when he placed another document in front of her, a psychological evaluation written by Dr. Celine Voss, a respected child specialist whose words carried the kind of authority judges rarely questioned. And as Isla scanned the text, her eyes widened in disbelief, because the report described her as emotionally erratic, prone to breakdowns, unable to maintain consistency in parenting, and having a pattern of psychological instability that could endanger a child's environment, a statement so outrageous, so brutal, so detached from the truth that Isla felt her heart slam against her ribs in panic, and she whispered, barely audible, how any of this was possible, how Darian could twist their life into such a grotesque nightmare. And Adrian, leaning forward, explained with quiet gravity that Darian had resources, influence, and connections, and someone like Dr. Voss didn't write such things without being incentivized, pressured, or deeply entangled in something personal. And that fact alone made Isla's pulse hammer in her ears, because if professional ethics had been warped to serve Darian's agenda, then Isla wasn't just fighting a divorce, she was fighting a system stacked against her, a system her husband had already poisoned. Then it happened. Her nose caught it, a faint, delicate scent of perfume clinging to the edge of Dr. Voss's printed report, a fragrance Isla recognized instantly because she had smelled it many times before, drifting faintly through Darian's shirts, lingering on his collars, clinging to the upholstery of the car, a scent that had haunted her long before her mind dared to question why. And as the recognition crashed over her, Isla's eyes widened, her breath hitching sharply in her chest, because this perfume wasn't hers, had never been hers, and yet it had been impossibly, undeniably present in her home, on her husband, in places she never understood, until now. And with that single realization, that soft floral fragrance became a smoking gun, confirmation that the betrayal poisoning her marriage wasn't just emotional or legal, it was intimate, orchestrated, and rooted in deceit so personal it made her skin crawl. And when Adrian noticed the shift in her expression, he asked gently what she had realized, but Isla couldn't answer, not yet. Not while her mind was spiraling through scenes she'd ignored, moments she'd dismissed, tiny clues that now formed a monstrous picture she couldn't unsee. Her breath trembled, her eyes burning, and she clenched her fists on her lap, nails digging into her palms as if trying to anchor herself in something real, something that wouldn't shift beneath her feet like everything else had. Because now she knew, now she understood, that Dr. Celine Voss was not just a hired professional, but someone who had access to Darian in ways Isla had never been told, someone whose perfume lingered too close, whose presence seeped into their life like a whisper behind closed doors, someone who stood beside her husband while building the case to destroy her. And that horrifying thought ignited something inside Isla. Something fierce and burning and nothing like the quiet woman she had been for years, something that whispered that if Darian wanted war, he would get war, but not the silent kind he expected, because Isla felt the first spark of a fire she had never allowed herself to feel before, rage, pure and unfiltered, rising not to break her, but to protect what was hers. And as she lifted her head, her eyes no longer trembling but blazing with the birth of a new resolve, Adrian paused, momentarily stunned by the transformation in her gaze, a shift from despair to something sharper, something that hinted at the woman she might become if she stopped letting fear dictate her steps. And that moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, marked the beginning of a dangerous shift in the balance of power, because Isla was no longer the silent woman in the corner waiting for mercy that would never come. She was awakening, piece by piece, breath by breath, into someone Darian would never see coming, someone who would not be erased by lies or broken by manipulation, someone who would fight for her daughter, for her survival, for her truth, even if the cost was blood, trust, or the last shards of her innocence. But just as Adrian prepared to outline their next legal steps, his phone buzzed with an alert that made his brows knit tightly together, a shadow passing over his expression as he glanced down, and Isla felt her stomach twist at the sudden tension in the room, sensing something had shifted in the air, something urgent and threatening, something that suggested Darian was already making his next move, and Isla, heart pounding, realized her battle wasn't approaching. It had already begun. And the next strike was coming faster than she could prepare for. The vibration of Adrian's phone still echoed in Isla's mind long after she stepped out of his office, her pulse thrumming with the certainty that whatever message he received had been another blow struck by Darian from the shadows, another silent move in a game she never agreed to play, yet was now trapped inside with no escape route except through the storm itself. And as she drove back toward the mansion, her hands tight around the steering wheel, she forced herself to breathe through the rising panic because she knew she couldn't crumble. Not now. Not when Darian was accelerating his plans, not when her daughter's safety hung in the balance like a delicate thread ready to snap at the slightest pressure. When she pulled into the driveway, the mansion stood before her, not as a home, but as a looming fortress of deception, every brick reminding her of the years she spent loving a man who had silently sharpened his knives behind her back. And as she stepped inside, the faint odor of Darian's cologne greeted her, laced with something that made her skin tighten in recognition before she could even name it. Something floral and sickly sweet that wrapped itself around the air with predatory softness. The same perfume that haunted the edges of Dr. Celine Voss's reports. The same scent that clung to memories she once ignored in the hope of saving a marriage already doomed by secrets she hadn't yet uncovered. The psychological war began subtly, Leora running to Darian the moment Isla attempted to guide her. the little girl suddenly parroting phrases no child her age should speak. Words like, "Mommy gets confused," or "Daddy says you worry too much." And each sentence sliced through Isla's heart with a precision that felt rehearsed, coached, fed to her daughter with careful timing. And it burned her to imagine Darian kneeling beside their child with a tender smile, weaving gentle poison into innocent ears, while Isla struggled just to keep her voice steady. But the most agonizing part was the way Leora's gaze sometimes flickered with doubt, not fully mistrustful, but hesitant in a way that had never existed before, and Isla felt the crushing weight of losing something deeper than a marriage. She was watching her motherhood being dismantled piece by piece, and Darian's smug silence as he passed her in the hallway told her he knew exactly what he was doing. Days slipped into a tension so thick it clung to the walls, and Darian grew bolder, arriving home with extravagant gifts for Leora, sparkling miniature dresses, expensive toys, rare dolls, items Isla could never have afforded on her own, even when Darian pretended she had access to their wealth. And each presentation came with a carefully crafted narrative, subtle words murmured loud enough for Leora to hear, but soft enough to appear harmless. Phrases like, "Daddy always makes sure you have the best," or "Daddy takes care of the things Mommy forgets." And Isla felt her hands shake each time she overheard him, her fury battling a terror so profound she had to grip the banister just to stay upright, because she knew exactly what he was doing. Shifting loyalty, rewriting reality, placing himself as the savior and Isla as the unreliable shadow fading in the background. Then came the moment that fractured something deeper within her. An evening when the sunlight outside still burned gold, casting long shadows into the living room, and Isla entered quietly, exhausted from trying to keep peace in a home built on landmines, only to stop cold as her senses caught something familiar and unmistakable, a scent so out of place, yet so deeply rooted in her nightmares that her breath halted halfway in her throat. She moved closer, slow, deliberate, almost afraid of confirming what she already knew. And there, hanging casually on the back of the couch, as if it belonged there, was Darian's shirt, freshly worn, creased and tainted with the unmistakable fragrance of Dr. Celine Voss, a perfume that seemed to bloom from the fabric itself, like a confession whispered into the air. And Isla felt something hot and violent erupt within her, a surge of rage she had never allowed herself to feel before, because the betrayal was no longer just emotional, no longer just strategic. It was intimate, physical, intertwined with passion and deceit in ways that made her stomach twist and her vision blur. She stood there in the quiet room, the weight of realization crushing her lungs as the truth settled like shards of glass in her chest. Dr. Voss was not merely a weapon Darian hired. She was the mistress whose perfume had haunted Isla's marriage long before the legal war began, the woman whose hands had shaped the lies now used to destroy her life. And the thought made Isla's heart pound so violently she felt it in her fingertips. But when little footsteps padded toward her from behind, she swallowed the scream rising up her throat, forcing her trembling face into a practiced calm as Leora looked up with innocent eyes, asking whether Daddy was home yet. And Isla bent down, brushing her daughter's cheek with a softness that broke her even more, whispering that everything would be all right, even though she didn't know how, even though her world was burning at her feet. From that moment on, every movement Darian made felt calculated, every glance drenched in hidden meaning, every sentence a dagger coated with honey meant to cut her while appearing harmless to anyone else. And the more Isla watched him, really watched, the more she saw the arrogance slipping through the cracks, the quiet satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won, who believed she was too weak, too frightened, too cornered to fight back. And that assumption fanned the small flame inside her until it grew hotter, brighter, more dangerous. The mansion now pulsed with deceit, each room holding pieces of conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, each hallway catching fleeting shadows of a betrayal deeper than she'd imagined, and Isla moved through it with new awareness, every sense sharpened, every instinct awakened, until the night she found what she'd feared and suspected, proof of their secret meeting. It was late, the sky outside a thick blanket of darkness, and Darian claimed he had to finish some work in his private study. But something in Isla's chest whispered that tonight was different. Something tightened in the air like a string pulled to near snapping, and she followed that instinct, moving silently down the hall, her bare feet muffling her steps, her breath shallow and controlled as she approached the study door, left slightly ajar. And inside, through the narrow crack, she saw what stole the last remnants of her illusions. Darian leaning close to Dr. Selina Voss, their voices low and intimate, their posture close enough to make Isla's stomach clench in revulsion, and though she couldn't hear every word, she caught enough to understand the depth of their collusion. Phrases about Leora's adjusted perception, plans to accelerate the court timeline, and Selina's soft, intimate laugh at something Darian murmured near her ear. Isla stepped back, her body rigid, her pulse thundering so violently she thought it might burst inside her, because now the betrayal was no longer a fear. It was truth, confirmed, undeniable, poisoning every memory she once cherished, and she pressed a hand against her mouth to keep from collapsing under the weight of it. She knew then she was racing against time, against two people who had already decided her fate, already written her out of her own life, already planned a future where Leora would be raised by them while Isla was cast aside like a discarded page. The realization wrapped cold fingers around her spine, pulling her into the abyss of what might come if she didn't move quickly, if she didn't fight back with everything she had left. And as she stood in the dark hallway, her silhouette swallowed by shadows, she felt the shift inside her complete, not a spark now, but a firestorm spreading through her veins, fierce enough to burn through every lie she had been fed, strong enough to carry her into the battle she could no longer avoid. Because Darian had made one fatal mistake. He believed she was already defeated. But Isla was just beginning to rise, and the darkness around her had no idea what was coming next. The image of Darian and Dr. Selina Voss leaning intimately across his study desk burned behind Isla's eyelids long after she slipped silently back into the hallway, her breath trembling in her chest as if her lungs were caught in a vice, and as she pressed her back against the cold wall, the realization sank deeper. She was fighting enemies who moved with precision, confidence, arrogance, believing she was too shattered to retaliate, believing her silence was submission rather than strategy. And when dawn finally broke, its pale light seeping through the curtains of her bedroom like a hesitant confession, Isla knew she would walk into the courtroom as a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. But she would not fall. Not yet. Not before she exposed the monsters who had rewritten her life with lies. The morning of the trial was suffocating even before she stepped outside, Darian humming downstairs with a lightness that felt cruelly deliberate, Leora's confusion heavy in her eyes as she hugged Isla goodbye, and Selina's perfume lingering faintly in the foyer like a ghostly warning that this day belonged to them. But as Isla stepped into Adrian's car and he gave her a reassuring nod, something steadied inside her, a fragile but unbroken resolve that whispered she would survive this day no matter how deeply they tried to bury her. The courthouse loomed ahead, cold and imposing, its stone walls carrying dozens of whispered stories, and as Isla walked up the steps, every stare from bystanders felt like a question. Is she the mother they said she is? Is she the villain Darian painted her to be? And each gaze struck like a pebble against glass, but she refused to shatter, lifting her chin even as her knees wobbled beneath her. Inside the courtroom, the air was charged with tension, thick enough to feel on her skin, and when Isla saw Darian sitting at the opposing table, immaculate in his tailored suit, face calm, posture confident, she felt a sudden wave of nausea because he did not look like a man terrified of losing his child or his reputation. He looked like a man moments away from applauding his own victory. Beside him, Dr. Selene Voss sat with a serene, professional smile, her hands folded neatly, her dark eyes slicing through Isla with calculated indifference, as if she had already erased her humanity and replaced it with a clinical diagnosis crafted to destroy. The trial began with opening statements, Adrian's voice steady but sharp, each word grounding Isla in place, but Darian's attorney countered with venom disguised as elegance, framing Isla as unstable, erratic, emotionally volatile, painting a tapestry of falsehoods so carefully constructed that the judge's calm expression wavered only slightly. Isla clenched her hands beneath the table, digging her nails into her palms, just to stay tethered to reality, because every sentence flung at her felt like being forced to watch someone steal her identity and parade it before the world. Then came Dr. Selene Voss, their queen, their weapon, their polished blade. She stepped onto the witness stand with the confidence of a woman used to being believed, her posture pristine, her voice steady, her expressions measured with perfection as she laid out her fabricated assessment of Isla's emotional instability, describing imagined incidents in chilling detail, how Isla allegedly screamed for hours, how she supposedly forgot to feed Leora, how she once disassociated in front of the child. Each lie struck Isla like lightning, jarring, violent, scorching through her nerves, and she felt her throat close as the courtroom listened intently, absorbing every poisonous word. Adrian objected repeatedly, but the damage seeped deeper with each calculated accusation, and Isla could see it. The subtle tightening of the judge's jaw, the slight purse of his lips, the faint narrowing of his eyes as if weighing the evidence with concern. And Isla almost felt the ground tilt beneath her, because this was exactly what Darian and Selene intended. To make her crumble, to push her into defending herself so desperately she looked unhinged, fulfilling the lies spoken about her. When it was her turn to take the stand, Isla's heartbeat thundered violently against her ribs, but she forced herself forward, the wood railing cool under her trembling fingers as she swore an oath she'd never break, not even to save herself, to tell the truth. Adrian's questions began gently, guiding her through her story, but Darian's attorney swooped in like a hawk once cross-examination began, striking with sharp, loaded words, twisting her every response, cutting through her emotions until Isla felt tears burning at the edges of her vision. "Isn't it true," the attorney pressed, "that you have had emotional outbursts in front of your daughter?" "No," Isla said, voice wavering. "I have never—" "But you do cry frequently, don't you? You admitted that your marriage has been stressful." "Stress doesn't make me unstable," she said. But the attorney was already building the next trap, snapping each word like a snare that tightened around her throat. Each question was designed to provoke, each sentence a deliberate pressure point, and when Isla stumbled over her words just once, just slightly, she saw the triumphant glint in Darian's eyes and felt a rush of helplessness so intense that a tear slipped from the corner of her eye, unbidden, unwanted, yet perfectly timed to match the narrative they had painted of her. The judge observed her quietly, expression unreadable, but Isla could feel the invisible scale tipping, the weight of lies pressing heavily on the truth, suffocating it. And she wanted to scream that she was not the woman they described, that she had fought for years in silence, that she had loved with everything inside her, but even her breaths felt like they were being used against her. Then, in the midst of her humiliation, something unexpected surged inside her, a spark, faint but fierce, a glimmer of defiance that whispered she was still alive, still standing, still capable of fighting back, no matter how deeply they buried her beneath their deception. And as the opposing attorney smirked, believing he had broken her spirit, Isla lifted her gaze and met Darian's eyes with a steadiness that startled even her, a silent promise that she would not die quietly in the story he was writing. Adrian placed a comforting hand on her shoulder as she stepped down from the stand, but Isla barely felt it, her mind racing with thoughts that collided violently, pieces of conversations she overheard, fragments of evidence she'd seen, memories that resurfaced with new clarity. But one realization began forming like a dangerous seed in her mind. Something she had ignored before, something she had dismissed as fear rather than what it truly was, the thread she needed to unravel their entire scheme. As the judge called for a brief recess, Isla stepped away, heart pounding, mind swirling with a revelation so sharp it nearly stole her breath, and she felt the world tilt under the magnitude of what she had just remembered. Something small, something overlooked, something so damning it could pierce through the walls of lies Selene and Darian built with such confidence. If she acted on it, if she dared to expose it, everything could change. If she was wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic. But the idea burned through her fear like wildfire, and Isla knew that if she used this truth at the right moment, she could shatter the courtroom in ways no one expected. The moment the judge inhaled, preparing to speak the verdict that would crush Isla's remaining hope, the air in the courtroom became so heavy it seemed to swallow sound itself, the silence thick with inevitability, dread, and the quiet certainty that Darian's twisted narrative was about to win. Isla felt her breath lock inside her chest, her fingers gripping the wooden edge of the defendant's table so tightly her knuckles flashed white, as though holding on could stop the world from collapsing around her. Darian leaned back confidently, a faint victorious smirk sliding across his lips, while Dr. Voss tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, hiding the malicious spark dancing in her eyes. Adrian kept whispering something to Isla, perhaps encouragement, perhaps strategy, but she no longer heard anything, only the slow, devastating pounding of her heart, like a drum being lowered into the depths. And then, in the middle of that tension-soaked stillness, a small, quivering voice cut through the air like a blade. "Wait, please." All heads turned. Even the judge's gavel froze mid-air. And there stood Leora, framed in the aisle as though she were stepping out of a storm, her cracked tablet pressed protectively against her chest, her shoulders trembling, her chin wobbling. But her eyes, her sweet, innocent eyes, burned with a fire Isla had never seen before. For a moment, Isla forgot to breathe. Her daughter looked so fragile, so breakable, yet something inside her radiated strength that defied everything Darian and Voss had constructed. The bailiff instinctively moved forward, unsure whether the young girl was allowed to approach, but the judge lifted a hand, signaling him to stop. A ripple traveled through the courtroom, curiosity, confusion, suspicion, while Darian's confident expression faltered, just a flicker, but enough to reveal he sensed something was slipping from his hands. Leora swallowed hard, took a shaky step, then another, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat as she approached the center of the room. Her small fingers struggled to unlock the tablet, her breath coming in shallow bursts, and Isla's heart clenched at the sight. She wanted to run to her, hold her, shield her, but she was frozen in place, trapped between fear and awe. Darian's eyes widened the moment he recognized the device, his daughter's old tablet, the one he had once dismissed as a harmless toy. Dr. Voss stiffened, her lips parting slightly as panic flickered in her gaze. The judge leaned forward, brows lifting, waiting for an explanation. I need to show something," Leora whispered, voice still trembling but louder than before, fueled by a courage that felt bigger than her small body. "Something they didn't tell you." A murmur spread through the courtroom like a wave crashing onto shore. Adrian's posture sharpened. Isla's breath hitched. Darian subtly shifted forward as though hoping he could intercept what was about to unfold. But he couldn't. Leora stepped into the open space, raised the tablet, and with a tentative finger, pressed play. Instantly, the courtroom filled with the unmistakable voices of Darian and Dr. Selene Voss, clearly recorded, clearly identifiable, unmistakably damning. Their words dripped venom, their confessions slicing through the lies they had so carefully curated. "She's breaking down perfectly," You keep pressuring her during sessions. I'll handle her medical record. The judge will believe anything as long as we make Isla look unstable. Once she loses custody, the money flows our way. Don't forget to increase her dosage before the next appointment. She needs to look unhinged. Gasps erupted. Someone covered their mouth. Another person stood up involuntarily. Darian's face drained of color, turning chalk pale. The confident facade he had worn like armor shattered instantly. His lips parted, but no words came out, only a strangled sound, as if his mind couldn't process how this child, this pawn he thought he controlled, had just crushed his empire of deceit with a single trembling act of bravery. Dr. Voss stumbled back a step, clutching the table as though the room had tilted violently beneath her feet, her eyes wild and darting like a cornered animal searching for escape. Isla felt her knees weaken, but not from fear, from overwhelming shock and pride so fierce it almost hurt. Her daughter, her fragile little girl who had been caught in the crossfires of manipulation, had somehow found the strength to stand against giants. Tears gathered in Isla's eyes, not from sorrow, but from witnessing the pure, unfiltered courage of the child she thought she was losing. The judge's expression hardened, shifting from impartial distance to sharp, alarmed attention. He raised his hand for silence, though the room had already fallen into stunned quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a revelation powerful enough to shake the foundations of everything believed moments before. He looked at Leora, then at Isla, then at Darian, and the weight of what he had heard settled heavily over his features. "How long have you had this recording?" the judge asked, his voice low, steady, but threaded with urgency. Leora hesitated, her small fingers gripping the tablet like a lifeline. "A few weeks. I didn't know if it was important, but I knew Mum wasn't lying. I knew they were hurting her." Her voice cracked, and the sound pierced Isla straight through the chest. "I didn't want them to take me away from her. So I kept it. I waited for the right moment." The judge nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Around them, the audience buzzed with disbelief, anger, and shifting allegiances as they processed the revelation. Adrian exhaled sharply, almost laughing from relief, immediately requesting the evidence be admitted officially. Isla pressed her hand to her mouth, trembling with uncontainable gratitude, her gaze locked on Leora, her warrior, her unexpected savior. Darian surged forward suddenly, voice rising in desperation. "Your Honor, this is fabricated. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." "Enough!" The judge's voice cracked like thunder, silencing the room instantly. Darian froze mid-step, his mouth snapping shut, as the judge stared him down with a coldness he had never encountered before. Dr. Voss clutched her bag, inching backward, eyes darting toward the exit like she was calculating her escape route. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, his tone razor-sharp, "you will sit down, and you will not speak unless addressed." Darian slowly lowered himself, but the panic that now contorted his features was unmistakable. A man watching the walls of his fortress crumble stone by stone, faster than he could rebuild. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Secure that device, and prepare to recess for evidence verification." Chaos erupted. Lawyers whispered frantically. Reporters scribbled notes with renewed frenzy. Adrian collapsed into his seat with an exhale that sounded like a lifetime's worth of tension breaking apart. Isla reached for Leora, pulling her into a trembling embrace as tears slipped silently down her cheeks, soaking into her daughter's hair. But before Isla could whisper a thank you, before she could breathe the relief she'd been starving for, Leora pulled back slightly, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "Mom, there's something else on the tablet, something I didn't want you to see yet." Isla's stomach dropped. A new dread crawled up her spine, because Leora's eyes, still brave, now held a shadow. A shadow that hinted the recording wasn't the only secret she had uncovered. A shadow that promised the next revelation might be even more explosive. And the chapter ends here, with Isla tightening her arms around her daughter, the courtroom erupting around them, the judge preparing for a storm, and Leora holding a truth that might change everything. The courtroom shattered into chaos the moment Leora whispered those trembling, haunting words about another secret hidden inside her tablet. And as Isla held her daughter tightly, terrified of what else had been uncovered, yet brimming with awe for the courage that had already changed the fate of the room, the judge slammed his gavel with a force that reverberated through every corner of the courthouse, his expression a storm of fury, disbelief, and cold judicial wrath that made Darian and Dr. Voss flinch as though struck. Isla watched him rise from his seat, his robes rustling like thunderous waves, and for the first time since this cruel battle began, she saw the full magnitude of the truth settling heavily on the shoulders of justice itself, creating a shift so powerful the air felt electric, crackling with vindication, long overdue, and the judge's voice, sharp and resonant, called for immediate order in a tone that made seasoned lawyers stiffen as the audience fell into stunned silence because they knew what was coming, retribution long denied. Ela felt her heart pounding wildly as the judge demanded the evidence be reviewed, but the content was already undeniable. The recording so explicit, so damning, so meticulously revealing of Darian and Voss's conspiracy that there could be no further debate, no doubt, no loophole, no manipulation left for them to exploit. Isla saw the truth ripple across the judge's face like a cold realization of how close he had come to sentencing an innocent mother to destruction engineered by two predators who had calculated every deception in chilling detail. He looked at Isla differently now, not with pity, not with doubt, but with something like apology, respect, and deep solemn acknowledgement of the torment she had endured under the false narratives twisted around her life. His voice boomed across the courtroom as he declared that Darian's petition for custody was not only denied, but dismissed with prejudice, that all claims he had made were grounded in lies, fraud, and malicious intent. And in that moment Isla felt time collapse, her breath faltering as the weight of months of fear, nights of trembling, days of humiliation, all cracked apart under a wave of overwhelming relief, so fierce it almost brought her to her knees. The courtroom reacted instantly, gasps, shouts, murmurs, rising like a tidal wave, as the judge continued, his tone now dripping with outrage, ordering that Isla be granted full and permanent custody of Leora, effective immediately, along with sole ownership of the marital home, financial assets, and legal restoration of her reputation, and Isla's hand lifted to her mouth, as if trying to hold in the shock, joy, grief, and freedom, all colliding at once. She felt Leora cling to her waist, crying, shaking, whispering, "Mom, we won!" over and over in a trembling voice that made Isla's chest ache with the kind of indescribable love that transcends pain itself. Darian shot up from his seat, the last remnants of his arrogance melting into feral panic as he began shouting, demanding the judge reconsider, insisting Leora was manipulated, insisting Isla was unstable. But his words were swallowed by the sound of officers moving toward him as the judge declared him under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, manipulation of medical records, extortion, and psychological abuse. Isla watched, her pulse thundering in her ears, as metallic handcuffs clicked around Darian's wrists, the sound as sharp as justice itself, slicing through months of his cruelty. Dr. Voss attempted to slip away toward the exit, her face drained of all its cold composure, but two officers blocked her path, placing her in cuffs as well, and the sight of her panicked, stuttering voice, begging for leniency, only sharpened the sense of poetic justice Isla felt rising inside her, a slow, powerful flame of righteous triumph, fueled by every tear she had shed in silence. Ela stood taller than she had in years, her spine straight, her chin lifted, her entire being radiating a strength she had never known existed within her until she had been forced to walk through fire and fight for her child with every fractured piece of her soul. As Darian was dragged past her, his eyes locked onto hers, wild, terrified, unbelieving, and she felt no pity, no regret, only a calm, unshakable certainty that he was finally facing the monster he had always been, stripped of the lies and control he had used as weapons. For the first time she saw fear in him, real fear, not anger, not dominance, but the fear of a man who had believed himself untouchable and now stood utterly destroyed by the very truth he tried to bury. Leora tugged Isla's sleeve, tears streaming, and Isla knelt, holding her daughter close, whispering promises that life would change, that they were safe now, that no one would ever take her away again, and for the first time, those words felt real, solid, tangible. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed. Adrian approached with shaking hands, eyes wet, congratulating Isla with quiet disbelief, because even he, experienced as he was, had never seen such a dramatic overturning of corruption, and he told her she had fought with a strength he admired more than any legal victory he had ever witnessed. Isla rose slowly, her breath steadying, her gaze sweeping the courtroom that had once suffocated her, but now felt like the birthplace of her rebirth, the very place where she had risen from humiliation into undeniable triumph. But even as relief washed over her like a cleansing storm, even as she held her daughter's hand and walked toward the exit where sunlight spilled across the floor like a promise of a gentler future, Isla felt a faint chill, because she had not forgotten Leora's last trembling words, the secret she mentioned, the one she had not yet revealed, the shadow that still lingered behind her brave eyes. The victory was real, powerful, transformative. But Isla knew the story wasn't finished yet, because whatever Leora had discovered might unravel yet another layer of truth buried beneath Darian and Voss's corruption, something deeper, something darker, something dangerous enough that even her daughter feared to speak it. And as Isla stepped out of the courtroom, victorious but wary, the wind brushing her cheek like a silent warning, she realized that retribution was only the beginning, and the next revelation could change everything again. The moment the courthouse doors closed behind Isla and Leora, the storm that had swallowed their lives finally began to lose its roar. The echoes of shouts, accusations, and clanging handcuffs faded into a distant hum that no longer controlled their destiny, and Isla felt the heavy chains of fear loosen with every step she took into the open air. Her fingers were interlocked with Leora's, the little girl clutching them tightly as if ensuring that this new peace was real, as if afraid the world might snatch it away. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow on their faces, gentler than anything they had felt in months, wrapping them not in judgment or threat, but in quiet assurance that the suffering had finally reached its end. Isla inhaled slowly, drawing in the scent of fresh beginnings, feeling her lungs finally expand without dread. It was the first breath of a new chapter, and she let it settle inside her like an anchor of hope. When they reached their new home, a place Adrian had proudly found for them, insisting they deserved somewhere bright, safe, and untouched by old wounds, Isla paused on the doorstep. The house wasn't grand, but it radiated warmth, bathed in golden sunlight that streamed through wide windows, illuminating polished floors and soft cream-colored walls. It felt alive, as though it had been waiting for the two of them specifically. Leora's eyes widened with wonder, her earlier exhaustion dissolving into excitement as she dashed inside, exploring corners, hallways, and rooms with the delight of a freed bird testing its wings. Isla followed her slowly, deliberately, wanting to savor each moment, feeling the weight of everything they had escaped and everything they were about to build. She touched the kitchen counter, the living room curtains, the smooth wooden banister, ordinary things, yet each one symbolized reclaiming her life. For the first time in so long, her home would not be a battlefield, a trap, or a witness to her suffering. It would be theirs, peaceful, warm, safe. Leora appeared in the living room, holding a small blanket she had found tucked in one of the new bedroom drawers, her face glowing with a mixture of joy and relief. Isla watched her daughter spin in the sunlight, the soft fabric fluttering around her like the wings of a butterfly, and her heart swelled in a way that made her knees weak. She saw not just a child, but a warrior, her warrior, who had faced darkness adults feared and had shattered it with truth and bravery. Isla's breath trembled as reality finally caught up with her. Leora had saved them. Her tiny voice, her trembling hands, her courage in the courtroom had changed everything. She had looked in the eyes of evil and refused to let lies win. Tears blurred Isla's vision, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming pride and gratitude so deep it felt like a new current inside her chest. As Leora ran into her arms, Isla knelt and folded her daughter tightly against her heart, feeling the rapid rhythm of Leora's heartbeat, the heartbeat that had given her strength when she had believed she had none left. They stayed like that for a long time, the silence between them rich with meaning, their breaths sinking like a promise. Isla whispered into her daughter's soft hair, thanking her without words, acknowledging everything she had done, everything she had endured. Leora hugged her even tighter, burying her face in her mother's shoulder as if letting go of the fear she had been holding for so long. When she finally pulled back, her eyes glistened with emotion far beyond her years. In a fragile voice, she whispered, "I had to show them, Mama. They didn't deserve to win. They were hurting you." Isla's throat closed, and tears spilled freely as she cupped the little girl's face, seeing not just her daughter, but her shield, her truth, and her miracle. They spent the evening unpacking slowly, choosing where each small piece of their new life would belong. The sound of cardboard flaps, drawers opening, and soft laughter created a symphony of healing, replacing the echoes of slammed doors, cruel accusations, and whispered conspiracies that had polluted their old home. Isla placed a picture frame on the mantel, just the two of them, taken on a summer afternoon long before their lives had fractured. For months, she hadn't been able to look at that picture without feeling a deep ache of loss, but tonight it felt like a seed of renewal. Leora insisted on framing her drawing of the two of them standing under a rainbow, holding hands, smiling broadly, the words "Me and Mama Forever" written in uneven handwriting beneath it. Isla placed it next to the photograph, realizing those two images, one past, one present, represented the bridge to their future. As night descended and the sky outside their windows deepened into midnight blue, soft lamps filled the house with a golden glow. Isla made chamomile tea while Leora curled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes still shining from the whirlwind of emotions. The quietness of their home was not frightening. It was comforting, like a gentle hand resting on their backs. Isla joined her on the couch, and Leora nestled against her side, their bodies molding into the shape of a bond unbreakable by any trial or betrayal. They didn't speak much. Words were no longer necessary. Their silence was gratitude, survival, and love, all woven into one. Later, when Isla tucked Leora into her new bed, a soft pastel-colored space decorated with butterflies, clouds, and little hanging lights, Leora held her hand and whispered, "You're safe now, Mama. We both are." Isla's heart shook at the tenderness of that reassurance, offered by a child who should never have been forced to witness the cruelty of adults. She kissed Leora's forehead gently, promising silently that no darkness would ever touch her daughter again, not while she had breath in her lungs and strength in her bones. She watched Leora drift to sleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. The shadows in the room harmless now, just shapes on the wall instead of threats. It was the first night in a long time that Isla didn't fear what might happen while she slept. When Isla returned to the living room, she stepped onto the balcony, letting the cool night air wash over her. The city lights sparkled in the distance, blinking like stars that had descended to earth. She placed a hand on the railing, feeling the solidness beneath her fingers, grounding her in the present moment. Everything she had survived echoed in her mind: Darian's manipulation, Voss's chilling lies, the courtroom's cruelty, the helpless nights, the fear, the doubt. But all of it now formed a distant constellation she had moved beyond. She wasn't broken, she wasn't defeated. She was standing on the other side with her daughter in her arms and her dignity restored. A sense of triumph flowed through her veins, quiet, powerful, undeniable. She had been dragged through fire, and she had risen, not spotless, not unscarred, but stronger because she had chosen to fight when the world expected her to fall. She understood now that sometimes strength is not loud. Sometimes it is the ability to keep going even when the ground shakes beneath your feet. Sometimes it is the courage to protect your child when lies surround you. Sometimes it is the bravery to speak truth even when no one believes you. And sometimes it looks like a mother holding her daughter's hand in a courtroom and refusing to let the world tear them apart. As Isla gazed at the horizon, where the dark sky met the faint suggestion of dawn, she whispered a vow, not out of fear, but out of fierce love. No darkness will ever own us again. The words felt sacred, a promise etched in her bones. This new life, filled with light, truth, and unwavering love, was theirs to protect and nurture. She would raise Leora not in fear, but in confidence, teaching her that courage born from love was stronger than any cruelty the world could wield. And when the first pale hint of dawn streaked across the sky, Isla let it wash over her face like a blessing. A new day, a new life, a future finally free of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning crafted from resilience, truth, and unconditional love. Isla stepped back inside, closed the balcony door softly, and let the warmth of her home embrace her. With every light she switched off, the home grew quieter, but the peace grew louder, filling every corner, every breath, every heartbeat. She paused at Leora's doorway, watching her daughter sleep with a serenity that had been stolen from her for too long. A smile touched Isla's lips, tender and unbroken. She realized then that the true victory wasn't the courtroom triumph, the exposed lies, or even the downfall of their enemies. The true victory was this moment, this gentle, golden quiet in which her daughter slept safely under her roof, protected, loved, and free. Isla whispered one last promise, the final thread closing the tapestry of their journey. "We are free, my love. And our life, our real life, begins now." And with the rising sun painting their home in gold, mother and daughter stepped into a future untouched by shadows, wrapped in truth, healed by love, and strengthened by every battle they had survived together. And that's the end of today's story. What did you think? Were you shocked, moved, or completely speechless? Comment below and let me know your thoughts because I love hearing from you. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Beyond Color Stories for more unforgettable tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Until next time, remember, every story has a secret, and every secret has its truth.